Okay, I hope you're okay. Fine. Good to hear that you're also fine too. Welcome. This is Introduction to CSS. We're just going to look at what CSS is and then how we can go ahead and use it. As you realize later, you'll find out that it's actually what we use whenever we want to go ahead and add style to our website. So in brief, let me just go ahead and give a brief summary of what CSS is. CSS in full is what we call Cascading Style Sheet. Cascading Style Sheet is a language which we use whenever we want to add style to our website, or maybe say we want to add some visual design to our web pages. It helps us in controlling a lot of, say, the colors that we want to display on our screen, the different layouts, say, whatever you're seeing on this screen, this slide of mine. I could go ahead and use CSS on our website to do that. Increase the font sizes, change the font sizes, change the font types, add the spacings. It also helps us in separating our what we call the presentation, or maybe say the presentation from the HTML themselves. So in brief, that's what it's used for. It helps us in describing the HTML elements, in this case being the HTML tags that you already know, say the body tag, the paragraph tag, the H1 tag, which we have already looked at. And another thing that it's going to help us do is, apart from just helping us, the developers of website, to make our page a little bit visually attractive, visually appealing, it's going to help us also in describing, or maybe say prescribing, which kind of styles should we use. For instance, which colors can we go ahead and put in? What kind of font sizes can we go ahead and use? What font types can we go ahead and use? What margin can we put to separate our margins, may let's say the borders from the content of our page? And also maybe something like positioning. Where should I put in a particular content, say an image? Where do I put an image on my website? So some of the things which CSS helps us do is that one. If you look at the HTML structure, HTML itself just helps us to put in the structuring, or maybe say structuring our content or layout of our content. Then CSS goes ahead to think about the design, making the page look attractive. How do make the page look attractive? So this makes our website a little bit easier to maintain, makes our website a little bit easier to work with. So why do we need CSS in this case? I'm going to go through the general BA overview in this case, and then later on we shall come back to this. Apart from it saving us a lot of work, that is controlling the layout of our pages at any time, we can also go ahead and have a little bit of consistency in this case. So we can go ahead and probably have just one CSS file, which can help us add a style on different pages. As you know, a website is just a combination of more than one web page put together. So we have multiple pages on a website. So with CSS, we can go ahead and just use one file to add style to all those multiple pages. That's why we shall have a little bit of what we call consistency. And at the end of the day, we shall realize that our page is having that uniform look. It's having the same design. Or if I go to this page, I still have a little bit of relation to the other page. So these two pages are connected. These two pages looks a little bit the same, a little bit uniform. So their styling are coming from the same source. It's also going to save us a lot of time, a lot of work, as you already know. And how do we do it? We are going to try to avoid, we're going to try to eliminate this repetition that we always have. Say we go ahead and start using inline styling. I've shown you how to use the inline style, that is using the style attributes on your tags. If you want to add a particular style to your HTML, but then you want to use a style attribute, you realize that for each and every tag that you have on your website, you must go ahead and add a style attribute to that particular tag for you to get the style that you want. And that's going to take you a lot of time. So we have different style sheets that we can apply on that same page. And later on, if you want to change any other style, any other design in our page, we can just go to one file and then we change that. That's in case we're using what we call external style sheet, which we store it later on in different locations, or maybe say different file. And basically those are the brief overview of what our CSS can help us do. So I've already looked at the why. That's the reason why we need it. This is an example of how a CSS code will look like. So we have what we call a selector, we have what we call the CSS property, and then we have what we call the value of that particular CSS. So as we are going to see later on in this slide, the names, as I mentioned here, that CSS in full, it's just what we call the cascading style sheet. The word cascading comes from the principle that in CSS we follow some kind of hierarchy. We follow some kind of hierarchical rule. In this case, we're trying to mean that where a style is particularly applied, it can go ahead and override, or it can get overridden by any other style which has higher priority. Say for instance, if we are using inline styles, we are going to be sure that the inline styles that we apply on a tag or on HTML element is going to override our internal styles that we applied on the head sections. And also the head internal styles can go ahead also override the styles which you shall apply in an external CSS file which you have just linked from the head section. So that's one of the things you should know. Sometimes also we may have some other selectors, like let's say the ID. The ID can also go ahead and override other general selectors, like say the class selector, the element selector, which in this case is a tag selector. And some of the later rules can also go ahead and override the rules which we had specified earlier. Why? Because it will have probably higher priority compared to the other one. Okay, so I'm not going to go through this, but let's just give a brief overview. If you look at HTML tags, usually HTML tags are not good for adding design, are not good for adding styles, are not good for adding any kind of formatting on our web page. Their sole purpose was to just describe, their sole purpose was to just add structure of the content on our web page, and that is it. Different tags which have been brought in, maybe for let's say the font tag which was there, which helps us in adding color and other attributes, like the background attribute, the BG color attributes, the color attributes, which we find on HTML even previously on HTML 3.2. They kind of became a little bit harder for developers, for web developers like you, to go ahead and use it. But anyway, the older us, not the current you, who is just learning. So it was a little bit hard for them to go ahead and do that. At the end of the day, they realized that they needed so much code. They needed so many HTML tags to just go ahead and design a simple website. For instance, you're going to add the fonts, you're going to add colors, and all those information, you have to add it in this one single page. And then before you know it, your page is going to be a little bit very huge. You have so many lines of HTML code, so many lines, which is including even the design. So this one here was a little bit harder. That's when the W3 consortium came in and helped us with the CSS. So CSS now came in to solve the issue which HTML was facing, that is now the formatting or the adding the styling. And that's the good part which CSS came in and helped us with. So we're going to see how many ways we can go ahead and add CSS in our file. But for now, let's look at the general syntax or the general rule of a CSS. So in adding a CSS, we have what we call the rule. So we have what we call the syntax. And the syntax of the CSS states that if you want to add a CSS code, you must have what we're calling a selector, and you must have what we're calling a declaration block. So a selector is basically what we are going to use to look for a particular location where we want to apply the style, or where we want to add the design, or maybe where we want to change its visual design, visual layout, to make it a little bit appealing. So that's the selector. It's kind of like a finder. It's kind of like some hint that we use to locate something. That is what our selector is. Then the declaration block, this is basically where we add the styles. This is where we add the design. This is where we add the rules that we want to be applied to our website for it to look much better, to make look much nicer. And in a declaration block, we can have one or more declaration, and for each declaration we do have what we call the CSS property, and then we have a value for that CSS property. So we have a property, and that's a property has a value. So the property and then the value pair, they're separated by what we call a colon. Then in the declaration block, if we have more than one declaration, if in the declaration block, if we have more than one CSS declaration, then we are going to separate individual declaration using a semicolon, as you see in this green text here. So we have a declaration block, and in the declaration block, we have the different CSS declaration, and each CSS declaration just has what we're calling a CSS property, and then the value for that property. The value now in this case is the style that we want applied to our website. Given any other style that we have, it's going to be what we shall apply on our website. So coming back to this example here, if you look at it now, the body becomes our selector, and then the CSS declaration is basically anything from the opening curly bracket to the closing curly bracket. Everything that we have within there is what we call the declaration block. Then in the second one, we have another selector called the H1. You realize that the H1, the body, the P are the HTML tags or the HTML elements, which you're already sure of. Then in the declaration block, we have the color property, and then the value of white for the H1, and then the text align with a value of follows this very syntax here. So in brief, a selector basically points us to a particular HTML element that we want to go ahead and change its design, go ahead and change its visual look. Then the declaration block is the one which is going to give us a location, a place where we can put our styles. So in the declaration block, we're going to have either one or more than one declaration at the end of the day. But make sure that you always separate your declarations with a semicolon. And if you look at a declaration, in a declaration, it just has two things. Okay, three. It has the CSS property name, and then it has the value that you are applying to that CSS property. Each and every CSS property contains a set of value. There is a set of acceptable values which these CSS properties do contain, and the value and then the name pair for the CSS declaration, we separate them using a colon. So we can have one or more CSS declarations at the end of the day inside our declaration block, but then we make sure that we separate them using a semicolon. So whether it's inline, whether it's internal, whether it's external CSS, we are going to still follow the same rule. We must have a declaration block, we must have a declaration, and in a declaration we must have a CSS property, and then we must have a value for that CSS property. The CSS property and then the value, we separate them with a colon. Then the CSS declarations which contain the value and then the property, we separate them using a semicolon. So if we have more than one declaration, we are going to separate them using a semicolon. So in this example assumes that we have a paragraph tag in our website, and we want to get that paragraph tag. So once we get the paragraph tag, any other paragraph tag which is on our website, we are going to get all of them. So once we get all those paragraph tags, we are going to give them two styles. We're going to change its color, the text color of the content of the paragraph tag. We're going to change it to red, and then we're also going to align them centrally. So we're going to put them at the center of our document, of our web page. So P now becomes the P element, or the paragraph tag becomes our selector, and then the declaration block were between the opening, and I bring it back here. The declaration block, which is appearing between the opening and the closing curly bracket. here, it's now what we have where we apply the different declarations. And if you look at here, we have two declarations. We have the first declaration for the color and then the value red. Then we have the second declaration for the text align and then the value center. So each declaration, as we said, it contains the property, the CSS property name, and then the value that we are applying to that particular property. So in this case, we have a CSS property called color, and we're giving it a value red. So the color can be any kind of colors that we have known. So it can be the color names that we're going to use, or maybe say we can go ahead and use something else, like let me say a combination of the red, green, blue, or maybe say using the hexadecimal values of those red, green, blue, and then we still shall get that which we have covered under, or we shall cover under colors. So just to explain this again, so P in this case now is our selector, color is one of the properties, and then red is also one the value of that particular property. Then the second one is text align, which is also a property, and then center is its value. Okay, so let's just run through the different selectors which we have in CSS, and then later on we shall come to examples, or maybe say how we can place them. But we shall run through this with an example. Maybe before we actually go ahead and do that, we probably may be interested in knowing what is this coloring. So the best thing I'm going to do, I'm going to open up let me open up my web page here, and I'm going to put in Notepad++. So I'm going to open Notepad++. We create a simple page, and it's this simple page that we shall continue adding our CSS styles on. So we're going to just create a single page which has a paragraph tag. Then once that one is already done, we can come back and add our styles. So we have, well, actually we have this one here. Okay, let me close these files for now. And yep, let's close these files for now. Let's create a new file. Come to file, new, then just create a new HTML doc. So just a simple one, just HTML, and now that it has a HTML tag. So we have that HTML, and inside the HTML tag, we're going to have a head section. Something simple, just brief, not something fancy. You can add the fancy styles on your own. So you can say introduction to CSS. Then close that title. In our body, we're going to add so in the body we can add let's just add a paragraph tag for now. Paragraph, say this is my first paragraph. This is an introduction to Cascading Style Sheet, or CSS in short. Okay, so we close this paragraph tag, save it, file, save as. I'm going to go to my local disk. So let me put it on desktop in a folder called that. And here I'm going to give it a name, say HTML and CSS.html. So that's the name of my file. Actually, I'm going to change the name to intro.html. So I click on the save. So it adds that styling for me. Now, when I go back to my folder, sorry about that, come here, then if I right click and I say open with edge, so this is what I have as my content. I can magnify it like that. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to come back here and try to add this style here. So one way of adding the style is using inline. And to use the inline, I'm going to come right here in my tag. I add a style attribute and I give it a value. So you said we want to change the color to, but anyway, I think let me not go into that. Let me use the one that you're already seeing. So I'm going to add a style tag here. Say style. We shall come back to the inline later. Then I say for every paragraph tag as my selector, I want to give it a color of red. So I'm saving this, then I'll come back to my page here. Once I refresh it, I expect this color to change to red. That's how we add the style. Then I want to put every content at the center. If I minimize this, put it back to normal at 100, it's still at that. So now when I say text align and I put center, now what I'm going to see, I'm going to expect this content here to move somewhere in the middle of this page. Refresh that. So you see it has moved to the middle somewhere here instead of having it at the side. So that's what these two styles, or this what CSS is doing for us. Okay, that's it. So let's continue from here and see now the placement of our CSS. I mean the different selectors that we have in CSS. We said that the selector is what we use for finding or locating or selecting what we want to add style in, and this what in this case is now our HTML element, or in short HTML tags. So the tag which we want to style, we want to add the style on, we need to select it, and there are 3 different ways, or let's say 5 different ways to select that, to maybe say locate the style, the HTML element that you want to apply style to. So the first way to do this, the first selectors that we use is the simple selectors, and under the simple selectors we can use the HTML element themselves, which is the HTML tags, and these elements we can select them based on their names, that is the name of the tags or the name of the HTML elements, or based on the ID attributes. Each and every HTML element has a ID attribute, but just that maybe we just don't go ahead and add it. Then we also have a style, a class attribute in this case. So the class attribute, or maybe say the ID attribute, or maybe say the name attribute, either of these 3, one which we are going to use is going to be what we are calling our selector. So we can go ahead and use either of those ones, and we shall be having our HTML element selected ready for styling. Okay, so the second one is what we call the combinator selectors. Now in this case, maybe we will probably interested in selecting a particular let's say we are interested in selecting a particular tag, and this particular tag, there is kind of like what we are calling a relationship that exists between these tags. So an example would be thinking of, maybe I want this particular tag, but this tag must be probably inside another tag. Or I want a paragraph tag, but this paragraph tag must be inside a div tag, or maybe say an h1 tag or any other tag. So that is how we can go ahead and add our selection using the combinator. So this combination is based on a particular relationship that exists between the tags. Then there is what we call the pseudo class selectors. Now the pseudo class selectors, we're going to use it based on this whenever we want to add style based on a certain state. Say maybe say there is a mouse which is moving on our screen, and probably it has moved over this, or maybe say it has touched this, or maybe say it has changed its state to something else. So whenever there is a state change, maybe say the page is loading or the page has loaded, then we're going to use what we call the pseudo class selectors. Then the pseudo element selectors also is going to help us whenever we want to go ahead and add a style to a section of the elements that we have. Then for the attribute selectors, later on, as you're gonna see, maybe this time round we want to add the style to that particular element now, but we want this style to be added to that specific element if it has this attribute or it have this kind of value as its attribute. So if its attribute has this kind of value, then we're going to add that particular style. So let's look at these selectors one by one. We're going to spend a lot of time on simple selectors, then this other combinator, the pseudo class, and then the pseudo elements, etc. is going to come in later. So for the simple selectors, let's start with the element selectors. The element selectors are basically the tag selectors. We select them. We use the name of the HTML elements to select the particular tag that we want to add the style to. An example is what we have already used, the paragraph tag, or using the p tag. So with the paragraph tag, we can go ahead and just call the name. So the simple syntax is one, just the name of the tag as the selector, then the declaration block opens. So you put the name of the tag as the selector and then you open the declaration block. The declaration block is from the opening tag and then the closing up to the closing curly bracket. So within the opening and the closing curly bracket, we list our CSS declaration or our styles that we want to add. So in this case, we have the text align and then the text center or text red, this one here, this style which we have added. So we have used this, the name of the tag. We can add another tag, say, let's add a h1 tag in this case. So for h1, going to say introduction to CSS. So in the h1 tag, now if we want to add a style, if we save this, go back and refresh our page, you realize that our introduction h1 by default add for us a style, a text which is a little bit bigger. So this one here does not have any style as yet, but if we want to add the style, then we can go ahead and use the name of this h1 as our selector. And how do we do that? I can come up here and then put it down here, like say h1, then the selector h1. So our selector is h1. Then the declaration block, we say it starts from the opening tag, the opening curly bracket up to the closing curly bracket. So we can add our styles here. Now, if I want to change the size, the font size, I'm going to change the font size of this h1 to something small. Like, let's say, okay, let's first try it with something too big, like 100 pixel. So we refresh this, so it becomes quite big. Then we can also center our h1 text, say align. We're going to say it's also centered. So refresh this. See, it also brings it to the center. So that is how we can add style using our element selector. This is how we can select an element and use it as our source of the style. Then the second one is what we call the ID selector. Now for the ID selector, it assumes that we have an attribute called ID in a specific tag, in a particular tag. So if a tag has an attribute called ID, then we are going to use the name of that ID as our selector. So the value of that ID attribute becomes now as our selector. So, and this is how we go ahead and use it. So we pick that ID of an element, which is usually unique, just as you can have your national ID, which identifies you, as your name, which probably identifies you if somebody does not share your name. We also have an ID, in this case for the HTML elements, which are there, the HTML tags. So it's this ID that we are going to use as the selector, which is going to help us pick a specific HTML element, which is just uniquely identifying it alone. So to do that, we're going to get to select that specific element using the ID element. We're going to write the hash sign or the ampersand first, and then we are going to follow by the ID of that particular HTML element. So the value of the ID attribute in that HTML tag is what we're going to use as the name of the ID. An example would be this. Let's use this very example still again. So assuming we have another tag here, let's add a div. Let's add a div tag. And in this div tag, I'm going to say it has an ID called para. No, info. So let's say we have an ID called info. This is a information div tag. So we close this. Now what's going to happen here is simple. To add this style, we said that we are going to select it, we are going to write an ampersand, or maybe say a hash character. Then we are going to follow it by the ID of the element. And the ID of our element in this case is info. So the value of an ID attribute is what we call the ID of the element. So we write the ampersand first, or the hash sign first. And once we have written the hash sign like that, then the name of the, or the value of the ID attribute is what we put in next. So that is now our selector. And lastly, we can add the declaration block. So in the declaration block, I'm going to change the color of that. Before I actually do this, let me first save it just as that. Then we come to our code here, refresh it. If we refresh, you see that the div tag is appearing here, nothing else is changing. So to add the color, I'm going to give it a color blue. Okay, then I'll change its font size to something like 40 pixel. Then refresh the page again. See, now it changes to 40 pixels. So that is how we are using our ID selector. We have a tag here with an ID called info, ID attribute with a value called info, which now uniquely identifies this div tag. So anytime we want to add a style using the ID as a selector, we're going to just look for the value of the ID attribute of this div tag. Then we append the ampersand first, or the hash character first, and then the name of that ID, or the value of the ID. Then it becomes our selector. Then now the declaration blocks comes in. So that is how we add our CSS selector using an ID. Whenever you're going to add a name, like naming your IDs, you should not use a number, or your name should not start with a number. For instance, here, if maybe say instead of starting with I start with a 1, this one here is not acceptable. It has to start with a letter, or maybe say an underscore, not a number. Okay, then the next one is what we call the class selector. So we have looked at the element selector, we have looked at the ID selector, and then now let's look at the class selector. Class selector also is almost the same as the ID selector. For the class selector also, it needs an HTML element to have an attribute, the class attribute. So the value of that class attribute is what we're going to use to select that particular HTML element to add the style on. So to select that element which has a specific class that we want to choose, that we want to select, and then style, we're going to, this time around, we're not going to use the hash sign for the class. We're going to use the period, or the full stop, or maybe say the dot. So we had the dot first, and then followed by the name of that particular class, or followed by the value of that class attribute for that particular tag. How do we do that? Let's go to our code, and then you see it physically. So now I'm going to add, let me add one more tag, which is, which tag have I use for now? Okay, let's say we want a horizontal rule, HR. So the horizontal rule, as we all know, it adds for us the horizontal line. So let me just come back here, refresh it, then it adds for us this horizontal line. So what we're going to do, we want to probably increase the, or maybe change the color of this horizontal line to something else. But to do that, I'm going to add a class attribute called horizontal. So like that. And in our selector here, we're saying that to add a style to an element using a class attribute, we're going to go put the dot character first, or the period, or maybe say the full stop, then followed by the name of our class, or followed by the value of the class attribute for that particular tag. So in this case, we can go ahead and have this. Then to add the style now, I'm going to add the full stop, then followed by the name of the class or the value of the class attributes, then that is our selector. Now the declaration can come in. So in the declaration, we're going to add the different styles. About color, can color work still? And then font size can be like 10 pixel. Let's increase the size of our horizontal line, and then we see it has actually reduced. So let's go ahead and add probably 100. Okay, yep. So it's basically what it's adding is not actually the font size, but it's kind of like adding should be border color, say green. Okay, yeah. Then we increase its border style. So it's not it's a border width. So border width, which is let's say 10 pixel there. Okay, now that makes sense. Okay, I think we need to change the border style. It's actually a border. The horizontal rule is actually a border. So we'll change the border style to solid. This is what we are covering earlier. See, now it becomes a clean one. So that is has using the horizontal, or let's say the class selector, to pick the horizontal rule and add a style to it. So we just change the borders, or even the whole of this one, we can just go ahead and add this as using the short and property of the border, if you remember. So gonna put a 10 pixel there, then put a solid as the type, or let's put a dashed in this case, dashed, and then we say the color is gonna still be green. Remember this? So let me remove this, and still the only thing which is going to change, instead of having a solid line, we're going to have a dashed like that, which is still the same thing. The different values, you can also change this to you know it already, dotted, which is still going to be the same thing, kind of like that. So we are kind of having two double lines here. We're going to correct that one later, but for now we're only interested in the coloring, nothing else. Okay, so that is how we use the class selector. Okay, recap. So in the simple selectors, we can use the HTML element name, the name of the HTML tag, as our selector. Then we apply the style, and in the style, so in the syntax of a CSS, we say that we have the selector. After the selector, we have the CSS declaration, and in the CSS declaration, we can have one or more CSS declarations. So now for the element selector, we just get the name of the element or the name of the tag, and then we add our styles in the declaration. For the ID selector, we get the value of that ID attribute. After getting the value of the ID attribute, we apply the style that we have. Then for the class selector, we just get the name of the class, and after getting the name of the class, we append the dot sign to it, or maybe say the period or the full stop to it. Once we have appended the full stop to it, we go ahead and now add our CSS declarations. And in the declaration, we are going to have the different styles that we want to apply. And that should be it. Okay, so we can also go ahead and be a little bit more specific and say, okay, I want this particular style to be applied to a specific tag which has a specific color. I mean a specific class. So let's create a paragraph tag which is having a class called center. So I'm going to create another p tag and I give it a class attribute of value center. Okay, now I say this in this paragraph as a center content. Okay, all right, so now what is going to happen here is if I refresh this page and I go down here, nothing basically changes. But what is going to happen here is I want to change this. The reason why this one here is changing and having center content is because we have added a style here for all the paragraph tags should have color red and then they should all be text align center. So that's why you have this other paragraph coming to do that. But now I want to change the color of this content here, this paragraph tag. I'm going to change its color and then its size. Only specific to this paragraph tag only, not to this other first paragraph tag. And to do that, I know that this paragraph tag here has a class called center. So what I'm gonna do is simple. I'm going to go to this one I call the selector, and then I only want the element, the paragraph element with a class called center. So all those classes called center, I'm going to change their color to purple. Then I'm going to change its font size. I'm going to change its size to say 30 pixel. Save this, refresh it. You see now, this one here is now different from this. I actually can increase its size to like 50 pixel so that you can see it clearly. Refresh this, so you see now this paragraph is quite different from this other paragraph, and yet they are all paragraphs and they are all supposed to be having the same color here. But now this is where the beauty of the cascading and name of CSS comes in. There is a rule, there is an order of precedence that we have, that we follow, that everyone must also follow. So that's how we add the style to a specific HTML tag. We can also go ahead and add two more styles to add this, use two or more CSS classes on the same element. So for instance, I'm going to add another class here called large. So in this class called large, what I'm going to do, I'm going to add a different color. So for any HTML element which is having a color, a class called large, I'm going to change its font size. Let me first remove this font size here. Okay, I can make it a default like 20. So I'm going to reduce it to a 20. Okay, this is kind of like almost a default. So because of this color large, this class large, which is also applied in this other HTML, what I'm going to do, I'm going to increase its size to 100 pixel. Actually, I can do 120. Let's do 150, and then you see it clearly. So don't forget to always add a semicolon. Now, when I come back and refresh this text here is going to increase its size even bigger than this. I think we missed something. What did we miss? Let's say font text center. Okay, let's see this. Color, font size, value is 150. I think something is wrong somewhere. Can't figure it out. Okay. Hopefully this is it. Yeah, that should be it. Let's refresh it again, or make it even a little bit specific. Okay, something like that. So I think the class large alone could not override this one here. Could not override this, because here already, where is the paragraph tag? here, so it could not override this one. Now, so we had to be a little bit more specific for it to work. So that's what we're trying to have there. All right, so that's enough of explanations, right? So the universal selector, maybe you want to add your style to and the entire HTML elements that you have on your page. So to do that, you're going to use the universal selector, which uses the asterisk. So for the asterisk, let's try to do this. You see how this page is looking like? So many colors. What I'm going to do, I'm going to I'm going to change this color, all of them to be having color, let's say tomato. So to do that, and then I'll alt text align them to the left. So with the universal selector, I just put the asterisk, and then I can go ahead and add my styles. So in the CSS declaration, I can change the color first to tomato. Then I'm going to also text align them to left. And I say the value is going to be left. So now save this. If I refresh, I expect all this color to change to a little bit of a red, though not red, but that red is called tomato. And you see how they are appearing on at the center. This time around, I want them to appear on the left. So refresh this. And something is still overriding it. I don't know what is overriding the text align. I see. So the individual text styles, you see, they are conflicting. So I have text align here, I have text align here, I have text align here. They are conflicting. Now, that's where the order of precedence now comes in. Since here we are applying it to a specific HTML element, there is no way that the universal is going to override that. But it was able to override only the first one, which is the element tag. But now this one, such as specific, it could not override it. Okay, so I think that should be it. Then for the grouping, now realize that we have the same in the H1, H2, this example here, we have the same style. That is, in all, we're applying the same text align center, and then we are also applying the same color, red. So we can go ahead and combine these ones using a comma to have a group. And in that group, we're going to have all of them having the same style. And in this case, we have the text align center and then the color red. So that's how we do the grouping. I'm not going to go into that. So this is all about the HTML. The simple CSS selectors. This is the summary. Okay, so how do we add the CSS in our code? We have already seen the first one, the second one, which is internal. So this is the internal, whereby we use this, we use the style tag to add that. But earlier I'd started with, I wanted to start with the inline, but I just went ahead to ignore that. So let's go ahead and see how this one can be done. So starting with the inline, then we shall go to the internal, and then later on we finish with external. So to add our CSS property, we can use the inline method. So the inline method, what it does is it goes ahead and applies the style directly to our HTML elements using what we're calling the style attribute. So with the style attribute, we're able to apply the specific style which we want to that specific HTML element. This one here is always very quick and it's very easy to use, especially whenever we just want to apply one style, the style once in our HTML page. So if you just want to apply a style once, then there is no need to go ahead and probably put it in the internal or maybe in an external file. Just go ahead and use the inline CSS and then you'll be able to do it. Though I'm not going to recommend you using the inline style, especially when you have your project or your work which is needing like 3 or 4 or more HTML pages, and you'll have to go ahead and add probably that style in most of them. Reason is simple. Sometimes if you have many HTML elements, many HTML tags in a particular page, and you want to go ahead and add style one by one to all these other, with inline CSS. Okay, so we can close this paragraph tag, go back and refresh our page. So after refreshing, if I come down here, you see I have this called this is styled with inline CSS. Now let's add the inline style. So how do we do that? Going to style attribute, create a style attribute, and inside the style attribute, this is where we add our CSS declarations. So the first thing which I want to add is a color, and the color I want it to be, let's use blue in this case. Then I want to change the font size. Font size, I'm going to make it a little bit bigger, like 25 pixel, semicolon, and then we can save and refresh. So I'm going to go back here, refresh, and you see that the color has changed to blue, and it's a little bit bigger compared to what we had earlier. So that is what we have as our inline CSS. So briefly, that's how you do it. In summary, where does it go? Where do we add inline CSS style? We go straight inside our HTML tag itself, and then we go ahead and add our style using the style attribute. So how does it work? Well, you're going to write this style immediately, or maybe say directly on your HTML element with the style attribute, as you have seen us do right here. Just add the style attribute, and then the value of the style attribute is going to be your CSS declarations. So the only challenge that you're going to, anyway, it's always better maybe whenever you want to just go ahead and give it a quick trial or a quick testing, and then you just make smaller changes like what we're doing in this class. But later on, if you want to go ahead and have so many HTML elements, then it becomes a little bit hard for you. Why? Because you're going to realize that there are so many HTML tags. Like here, it's already growing. So far now we have 6 HTML tags, and if we had been using this one here, the inline style, it would be a little bit hard for us to do it. So I wouldn't prefer that. Okay, so that is it with the inline. Anyway, let me just step here. So going through the next is what we are calling the internal. So with the internal, we are going to write our style within a style tag, which we shall put inside the head section. So in the head section, that's where we're going to put our style tag. So given any other HTML style, that is where we're going to put our HTML tag. I mean, our styles. So what we had already done anyway, this is what we have just done here in this code right here. So you see up here, we have a style tag inside our head sections. So in the style tag, the opening and then the closing style tag, this is where we add our CSS styles. So that is what we call internal. Your CSS declarations appear within your style tags. So in the style block here, you add the opening, and then the closing tag is what we're calling the style block. So we're going to have our styles all applied there. So I'm not going to repeat this because you have already seen us do it. There's no need to repeat all this one here. You just get your CSS declarations, the selector, and then the declaration, and you go ahead and add it within your opening and then the CSS style. So assuming we didn't have this, what I would do, which I would expect many of you to do as well, just come to your head section here, add a style tag, and after adding the style tag, you can go ahead and now start adding your declaration. Maybe say I want to style my ID. So to style the ID, I'll just call the name of the ID as a selector. Then we go ahead and add our style. Maybe say I want to change the color to something else like green. Okay, then I change the font size to something like say 20 pixel, etc. So save this, go back here and refresh it. You see that it changes to that, but that's not what I want. So I'm going to remove this and do the change, and it will remain with that. Why? Because I'm going to copy this style and put it inside my head section. Okay, so that's it with internal. Then the last one is the external. So in the external CSS, we store our styles in a separate file with a file extension called .css. Then later on, we just go ahead and link that particular file to our HTML using what we're calling a link tag. So it's the link tag which you're going to put in the head section, just probably after the title tag in the head section or any other way. And this one here becomes useful, especially when we have now the website is now growing, our web application is now growing, and then we want to still make sure that we keep our designs maybe say separate from our HTML contents. If this is our plan, then we're going to use what we're calling the external CSS. So in the external CSS, at the end of the day, also it's going to encourage or foster what we're calling reuse. So with this external CSS file, I can include it, I can link it in different, so many multiple HTML files and in HTML pages. Then at the end of the day, I will still have that very same style applied in most of these HTMLs. So how do we do that? I'm going to go back to my Notepad++ here, copy this line of code. Actually, not just copy. I'm going to cut all of them like this. I save this. Actually, I should also go ahead and remove this. Then what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a new file and I'll paste this code right here. So let me first do the indenting clearly. Okay, like this. So this is a styling which I have. Let me first remove this one actually as well. Anyway, let me leave it. So I'm going to save this, come to file, save as. What I'm going to save it is I'm going to save it as styles, style.css. So in the save as type, I'm going to look for cascading style sheet, which is this one here. Choose this and then I click on save. So this is my style. Now, coming back to my HTML here, what I'm gonna do next is try to link this style. And how now, if I just save this and I come back to my browser and I refresh it, everything is gone. The only thing which is being applied is the inline CSS style. Why? Because it's already there by default. But other styles, like for this ones here, which were applied in our internal, like right here, they are no longer there, they are gone. So to do that, we have to link this external CSS file to our HTML page. And how do we do that? We use the linked tag. So I have the link tag, which takes in the relation, which is just trying to tell us what type of file are we working with. And then we say the style sheet. Okay. So once we already say it's a style sheet, we have to specify now the location of that particular style sheet using the href attribute. So the href attribute is the same as that one which we have in the anchor tag. So my file is called style.css and I've saved it in the same folder where this HTML file is saved. So when I save this and then I go back and refresh my website, I should be able to see the styles back. You see, like that. So it's pulling the styles which is in this file here, external CSS file, and then linking it or including it on the head section here of my HTML5, and then applying the styles the way it was previously. That's why I'm able to see these styles. Okay, I think, yeah, that should be enough. Let me just change this back to solid. Okay, so that's how we add our CSS to the HTML document using the internal, the external, and then the inline. So we have already seen all this. I'm going to just run through them like that. And it's also possible for us to add all this at once. I can actually have both. You see now here, I have both the inline. The inline style is already here, and also I'm linking and the external style here. So this is a two ways of doing it. Then I can also go ahead and add my style tag here. So in the style tag, and then I can say, let's add the first section. Let me say here, I'm going to use a H6. Okay, let's use H5 and say the cascading style sheet following roles. Okay, H5 like this. So I'm going to style this H5 within here. So I'm going to say H5. So inside the H5, the style which I'm going to pass there is going to be, as usual, we change the color. And then we're going to say that for this one here, we're going to give it a color. Say, okay, let's try Dodger Blue. Okay. So when I save this and I refresh it, say it's right here, but let's change its font size also later too. Font size to say 50 pixel. And I'm going to move it, 50 is a little bit too big. Let's do 20, okay, 30. Okay, so I'm going to move it from the left to the right using text align. So you have text align right. Okay, like this. And now you see it has moved to the right. So this is how we can use all of these methods at the same time in one single file. So you're not limited. It doesn't mean that if you have 3 different ways, you can only use one at a time. No, you can actually use both of them at the same time. And then the order of them being applied, usually inline text precedence first, then followed by the external or the internal CSS files which are there. Then lastly, we shall have the browser coming in. Now to add the comments, we use the / asterisk and then the asterisk back / for putting our comments. Okay, I think that should be enough for introduction to HTML. Any other thing shall come in later. Okay, so that should be it. Okay, enjoy your time. We meet some other time. Bye bye. I'm gonna stop right here.